Hello and welcome back. This is Botany 101 and I'm Angela Nishimoto. Okay? All right, for today, okay, the grasses, all right? Our objectives for today, okay, include the fact that whole grains are most nutritious, okay, of all the kind of grains that you can possibly get. We talked a little bit about this before, yeah, when we were talking about nutrition. Secondly, we're going to talk about, in particular, wheat, corn, and rice, the big three, where it comes to grains. And we're going to also talk about others, okay, in this group, the grasses. Then we're going to talk a little bit about forage and landscape grasses. Okay, forage generally means that livestock eat it, and landscape usually means turf, okay? Alrighty, then all these, various sort of plants, they all belong to the grass family, okay? Also known as a Poaceae. Another name for the grass family that people don't usually use so much now, but I like to give it just in case people get confused, is a Gramineae, all right? Most people do use Poaceae now. And over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that bamboo, okay, is a kind of grass. Yeah, this is bamboo. Okay, I'm not sure whether it's a Hawaiian variety or one from Asia, but it is, it is actually a large grass. And here we have sort of like a, what would you call it? Like a, I guess some people call it a worm's eye view. Like if you're lying on a grass and you're kind of eyeballing it, at low level. So this looks like turf to me, okay? So this is another kind of member of the grass family. All right, and the grass family, of course, includes cereals, okay? Cereal grains, all right, include the big three that we just talked about, but we also wanted to show you, this is an illustration from your text, that the grasses, including sugarcane, okay, very famous in Hawaii, sugarcane is a grass, okay, maize or corn, and rice and wheat. Look at this, all the tonnage that we produce in the United States for this. This is actually world crop production. So look at this, boy, these are all really big producers in terms of land given over to their cultivation. You also see barley here and also sorghum, okay, two other members of the grass family. So the cereal grains are very, very important, okay, as well as sugarcane. And you can see the sugarcane, wow, lots of stuff. This is 1,350,293,120, okay, metric tons of these sugarcane produced, okay? Alrighty, then, okay, so this is wheat. I think that we've seen this illustration before. This is a illustration of part of the plant. You see the leaf, stem, okay, and flowering, or a fruiting head. No, this is a flowering head. These would be the fruits. Remember that these particular fruits are called grains. And here's a female part of the flower, the pistil. Here's part of the male part of the flower, the stamen, and etc. Okay? So this is wheat, and this is rice, and you can see that looking at this, the flowers are very similar. If you recall correctly, the flowers, of course, are the most conservative parts of plants. So that is what taxonomists, you remember what taxonomists are? Taxonomists are botanists and other scientists that actually classify and name different kinds of organisms, right? So one of the things that you're seeing right now is that these different kinds of plants have actually very similar flowers and other structures, okay? And we also have corn. This is one part of the corn plant showing the male flowers, okay, in a male inflorescence, okay, also known as a tassel, okay, and here are part of the female inflorescences, okay, in another type of inflorescence known as the ear, and you have all these silks. These silks, corn silk, you might think of corn silk, I think cosmetics. They used to have a kind of powder, face powder, that they used to call corn silk in one of the drugstore brands. Well, this corn silk are actually the stigma and the styles, very, very long, okay, stigma and style of the female flower. Remember what stigma and style was? Yeah? Okay, so we also have barley and sorghum, oats, millet, and rye. These are other cereal grains, important, especially in more tropical areas of the world. Okay, wheat, rice, and corn tend to be more temperate climate. Okay, even though you can grow corn in some subtropical and tropical areas as well. So here you have barley over there on the left, and you have sorghum on the right. Okay, And here's oats. Okay, at one time oats were thought to be fit only for animals. You know, this was in the early Roman days. Romans, even if they were being under siege and they were being starved out or something, they refused to eat oats because they thought it was only for animal food. Okay, and over there on the left you have some millet. I think that's pearl millet, and on the right you have rye. Okay, so one of the things you notice is that many of these have very similar looking inflorescences. Okay, like this. All right. So some characteristics of the members of this family include, for one thing, okay, they have, there's about 600 genera. Do you remember what genera are? Yeah. So genera, okay, is plural genus. So there are 600 different genera and about maybe 8,500 different species, yeah, of different kinds of grass family members. Another thing about them, in that in terrestrial areas in the world, they tend to be the dominant vegetation, okay, in the kind of ecosystems known as prairies and savannas. So here is a little photograph of grasses, you know, in some prairie area. I think this might be from the North American continent. And savannas. Savannas are actually grasslands with occasional trees, okay? And savannas very famous too, especially in Africa, yeah? So these different ecosystems are places where grasses are dominant, okay, dominant vegetation. Now, and here is a picture. I think this is a photograph of a grassland, a temperate grassland, like a prairie. All right. Yes. All right. Another thing is that grasses tend to be very variable. They can be found in way cold areas like Arctic areas to tropical swamps as well. Okay. So here. Some grasses, just showing you different ecosystems. And this is, I think, from a cold area, and this is part of a swamp. One of the things you'll notice is that in these photographs, you actually have a whole lot more trees, maybe, than you might actually see there, yeah, just because maybe the photographer wanted to show something which had more visual interest, yeah? But in these places, oftentimes there's big areas that don't have a whole lot of, you know, large plants in, okay? That's something that's an interesting sort of thing. Because when you're taking photographs, you want it to look nice, right? Okay, another thing is that the grasses will actually cover about 1/4 of the world's surface area of terrestrial ecosystems. So about 25% of the vegetation, you know, making up the land ecosystems are actually covered with grass. So about 1/4 of it is grasses. So here's a nice, you know, image of the world. Okay, all this terrestrial areas. So that means that, I guess, not counting the oceans. Yeah. So about 1/4 of these land areas, okay, are the dominant plants are the grasses, okay, 25% of the vegetation. All right, so other characteristics, okay, so vegetative characteristics is that grasses are usually herbaceous, okay? One of the exceptions that we saw that kind of proves the rule is we looked at bamboo at the beginning, yeah? Bamboo is also sort of woody type. It's not really true wood, right? Even though that definitely you have hard cells in there that make it woody seeming, but since monocots, and of course grasses are monocots, that generally they don't have secondary growth. They don't have a vascular cambium that produces more xylem and more phloem. So, but most grasses are herbaceous. That means soft growth, green growth, and etc. Another thing too is that these kinds of plants tend to have leaves that are linear. That means the leaves tend to be long and skinny. Okay, and remember another characteristic of monocots is that they have parallel venation. And you can see in some of these leaves on this image here that the venation is indeed parallel, with the secondary veins running parallel to the midvein of the leaves. All right? Okay, and another characteristic is that if you cut a grass, you know, even if you're cutting a turf grass or something, you know, like Guinea grass or California grass, you know, which most people tend to consider weeds, if you cut them with a sickle or something, you look at it, the stem tends to be hollow, sort of like this, right? You actually can see, you know, inside of the stem, okay? Alrighty. Other vegetative characteristics is that some grasses have horizontal stems. You know, remember you have stolons as a type of stem adaptation, horizontal stem that can be reproductive. So stolon is generally above ground, whereas a rhizome tends to be under the ground. They're very similar to each other. Okay, stolons are also sometimes called runners. So here you have an example of a stolon. okay, and also a rhizome. Another good feature that we see in this illustration is that this area here called the crown, this is part of the stem of this particular part of the grass. Now if you have little keiki, like here's a little baby grass plant, okay, growing at the end of the stolon. Here's another baby grass plant growing on the end of this rhizome, okay. Do you remember this is called asexual reproduction or vegetative reproduction, and these little plants tend to be clones of the mother plant or the parent plant. Another thing that you can see from this illustration is that you have a fibrous root system. Yeah, so you have linear leaves, you have vegetative reproduction perhaps, okay, on a condensed stem, and then here you have these horizontal stems, and you have also fibrous roots, okay, different characteristics that we generally attribute to monocots, yeah? All right, fibrous roots, yeah? Another thing too is that you have some grasses that are annuals, some of them are what we call perennials. Annuals, if you recall, are plants that germinate, they will grow, they will flower and fruit over 1 year. So a lot of cereals, the ones that we tend to eat and feed to our animals, these tend to be annuals, and that makes sense, right? If you have a plant that is growing in 1 year, putting a lot of its energy, okay, into the fruits, all right, and actually making these fruits that we consume for food. One of the reasons why we consume it for food is that they're very nutritious. They have lots of starches, maybe proteins, maybe fats, all three in some cases, all right? So what they tend to do is that we grow them, and they tend to put a lot of their food reserves in the fruits, and of course when we harvest them like that, so if they're putting a lot of the food reserve into their fruits, that generally you can kind of infer from that that the plants tend to live maybe only a year, yeah? Whereas a lot of pasture grasses and what we call turf grasses, the ones that we have in our lawns and on our golf courses, they tend to be perennials. That means that they will continue growing and producing over year after year after year. Yeah, usually over 2 years, okay? Alrighty, then we also have the flower, because of course grasses are flowering plants. Okay, even if we might not think about that sometimes. Now, if you recall a little bit earlier when we were talking about with this, we see here like a characteristic type of grass inflorescence, okay, with the flowers, okay, at the, I guess this might be one particular type, maybe called a panicle. You see these blade, also known as the part of the leaf. Here you have the horizontal stem. Okay, and then what we have here is like part of the flower. One of the things you might notice is that you have these glooms, okay, glooms and also loticules and such. These are actually bracts, all right? You also have things called the palea and the lemma. So don't worry so much about the terminology for that. Just remember that you have a lot of bracts that surround the grass flower. And another thing that you might notice, so take a look at this grass flower here, this dissected or opened up grass flower. Just take a look at it and just try to think, what's here and also what is missing, okay, that would make up a flower. You do have male parts here, right, the stamens. You also have a pistil in this one, so it's a perfect flower, but, okay, just think about this for a minute, all right? What's missing? Okay, so these grass flowers are actually part of inflorescences, all right? You can have either one or you can have many flowers in an inflorescence. Remember that an inflorescence is a bunch of flowers, yeah? Another thing, here you have some of the answer. The flowers tend to be inconspicuous. When you think of grass flowers, you think of green, brown, whitish. They don't tend to have really garish, very bright colors. So the flowers themselves tend to be inconspicuous. Another thing about the flowers is that they are incomplete. Okay, you don't have sepals or petals. Incomplete means that you're missing one or more of either a sepal or petal or stamen or pistil. Okay, so they're incomplete flowers. And here you can see the feathery stigma here. Here you see the anthers of the stamens. Okay, so you can see that the flowers are greatly reduced. Okay. So you have 3 stamens, 1 pistil, and that kind of holds true for monocots. You have stamens in 3s, right, or 3 stamens, yeah? Remember, one of the characteristics of a flower of a monocot is that generally the flower parts are in 3s. Okay, so you have incomplete flowers, you have those that are sort of shy, retiring looking, kind of not really gaudy or really, you know, obtrusive, okay? Another thing, another characteristic of these flowers are that they produce a lot of pollen, copious amounts of pollen. Remember that during the summertime, some people suffer from allergies, and this is usually when the grasses are blooming. It's producing all this pollen, and some people get allergic reactions to that, okay? And you have feathery stigma. So if you look at this other grass here, nice, couple of nice photographs from Dr. Carr's website here. You can see the anthers. You can that will make lots and lots of pollen, feathery stigmas. Okay, so what are these adaptations? How are they pollinated? What do these adaptations point to? Think about it. How are they pollinated? What pollinates these flowers? Can you remember that? Okay, think about it for a minute. Okay, they're pollinated, okay, by wind. All right, they tend to be pollinated by wind. So therefore, they didn't really need to have petals to attract a pollinator because they're not pollinated by animals. So what they do, they produce lots and lots of pollen because if the plant is dependent on wind to disperse the pollen and get it on the stigmas of other plants or even on the same plant, what's going to happen? It's very random. So it's a good, good strategy in terms of evolution for the plant to actually make lots and lots of pollen. You have these feathery stigmas too. It's feathery, so what they'll do, they'll catch the pollen that happens to be flying in the wind, right? That makes sense, yeah? So things, if you can figure it out, you can sort of see the logic in the way nature has designed these various, designed actually implies intent, so that's not good, but still, how nature has affected and kind of put pressures on these different kind of plants in terms of reproduction, because that's actually what happens in nature, is that you're a successful organism if you have managed to reproduce yourself, okay? That is when you are evolutionarily fit, okay? All right, next we're going to talk about the fruit, okay? The fruit of the plant. Remember that the flower, after pollination happens and double fertilization happens, you have the development of the fruit from the same organ, okay? And the fruit and the flower, these are the sexual organ of the plant, right? So what you have is that you have a fruit called a grain. Do you remember what grains are? Okay, these are dry fruits, okay? And they tend to have a single seed. And another thing about them is they do not split open, or in another way to call it, they're called indehiscent, okay? Indehiscent, they don't split open. Now if you look at the anatomy, okay, of a grain, okay, remember one of the characteristics of a grain, like a corn kernel is actually a grain. Also a wheat berry is also a grain. It's a fruit, okay? It's not really a seed, even though I think even I slip up and call them seeds sometimes, but they're not really. What they have is you have this wall of the fruit that is fused, okay, to the seed. So usually when even if you got one of the fruits and you're dissecting it out, you can't really differentiate very easily the wall of the fruit and the seed coat, okay? So this part here generally is taken off the plant. Anyway, this part here, which has to do with the fruit wall and also the seed coat, that's what we call bran, okay? What is bran? We call it fiber sometimes, right? But this is also very nutritious. Another thing is that, like you hear of wheat germ like that, so the embryo part, okay, of the grain fruit is referred to as a germ. And in some places, sometimes this is also removed when they're refining grains, okay? And you have here the endosperm. Remember what the endosperm was? It is a result of fusion of a sperm nucleus with two polar nuclei, okay? And that actually makes up what we call the endosperm, all right? You also have something called an aleurone layer, and that actually is very protein rich, okay? So that sometimes is also taken out of it as well, all right? Another thing too is that the bracts, remember that there are a lot of bracts around this fruit, that is what people call the chaff. You might not know what that is, but think about it. You probably have heard of people with this kind of colloquialism or a little, what is it? It's like a saying, adage, yeah, that you have to learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff. So what they're calling the wheat is, of course, the staff of life, and the chaff is what is winnowed away. That they want to get it away from the rest of the they want to get it away from the grain. So you separate the wheat from the chaff, sort of like stuff you can't use or isn't very good from the wheat, which is very wholesome, very good, and something that you want. You want the undesirable element kind of separated from the desirable element. Okay? So much of our sayings really go back in time, historically, Now, so the outer wall of the grain, like we just talked about, okay, so the outer part, the inner part of the fruit and the outer part of the seed is called the bran. Very nutritious part of the plant too, okay? And then we talked about this also, the embryo is called the germ, all right? And most of the grain is endosperm. So remember that even though we use the endosperm for food, for the plant, the endosperm is to nurture the germ or nurture the embryo, right? It's actually a food reserve for the little tiny baby plant that is the embryo, okay? Another thing too is the important cereals for us, okay? Generally, the chaff, remember the chaff we just talked about? Also the bran and the germ tend to be processed and removed, okay? So the grain tends to be processed with those three components taken away, okay? So what a lot of us are familiar with, including white flour, okay, from wheat, as well as cornstarch that, you know, some of us might use to kind of thicken a stew or a soup, yeah, cornstarch, and also white rice. Okay, so these are very familiar to most of us, and these products are actually a result of removing a good deal of the fruit and such, okay? Alrighty. So whole grains, all right? Whole grains have the fact that only the chaff, which we already talked about, that most people tend to consider undesirable, the chaff only. So you do have the germ, and you also have the other parts that are important. Another thing about this is that generally these grains will give 50% of the calories that we humans all over the world, more than half of the calories that we eat, tend to come from these grains. Very, very important. Okay, they're main sources of carbohydrates that we see over on this side. This is mostly wheat, I think, but it looks like they have others. Wheat and cornmeal, it looks like. Maybe these are all different. Whole wheat meal, maybe white flour, and also wheat berries, yeah? So the grains actually gives us many of the carbohydrates that we eat. Also, like we saw this before, this is showing parts of an animal cell with the fluorescing parts of it actually being structural proteins, okay? So they provide a lot of different kind of proteins, especially in places where people's diets don't include a whole lot of animal proteins. Okay, so many people get a lot of their proteins from grains, all right? So this is from whole grains, okay, what we call whole grains. Okay. So the first one that we're going to talk about is something that we can call a staff of light. Okay, what is it? Okay, it's wheat, right, or bread. Yeah, so bread usually is made from wheat. So wheat, generally we call them triticum. That is their genus name, right? And so generally all the wheats that we use nowadays are actually hybrids. Okay. All right, so generally they tend to grow in temperate grasslands. Okay, temperate, it tends to be like North America, Central Asia, you know, some places in South America. So temperate areas that are usually like above or below, let's see, I don't want to give you the wrong information, over or below 25 degrees latitude. So they're, you know, northerly and also so southerly. So here you have these temperate grasslands that have these very cool temperatures. Okay, so these are where these different kinds of wheat do their best. So here's a little pile of wheat harvest, okay, like a haystack, yeah. Another thing too is that many of these grasslands that do provide a place for people to grow this wheat include the Ukraine. So these are the top producers, okay, of this staff of light. The Ukraine, the United States, Canada, China, India, Argentina, yeah, in the southern hemisphere, as well as France and South Africa. Okay, so all these places are places where you have these temperate grasslands. And this, I believe, is an image of the steppe, okay, which is in Central Asia. It's spelled S-T-E-P-P-E. It's known as a steppe, okay? Argentina, I forget what they call where they are. Anyway, so these are temperate grasslands. They tend to have very cool temperatures. This is like a place where the wheat grows the best, okay? Now, the staff of life originated in West Asia. I call it West Asia because that is sort of like not as Americentric as some people usually call it, the Middle East, yeah? But West Asia, western side of Asia, about 9,000 years ago, okay? How can they tell? For one thing, I guess they have archaeological digs and such, that they have evidence for the fact that the people there, you know, domesticated and tamed wheats, and they also have a whole bunch of wild species in these areas here, present-day Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. All right, many wild species there. Why is that important? Remember we talked about that before? Why is it important that we know where the origin of plants came from? Yeah? Remember that if something happens to the grains that we're growing now, this is over half of the calories that the world consumes, okay? So if there's some kind of disease or susceptibility to some kind of a pest of some kind, they can go back to the source, where the plant came from in biogeography, to find plants to actually hybridize with the ones that we have now. So, you know, the whole world won't starve, even though hunger is definitely a problem in the world even now, which is a crime. Shouldn't be like that, okay? Okay, so here we have Western Asia, okay, with the Fertile Crescent over here, I guess Northern Africa and also Western Asia. And here you have the Fertile Crescent. We've seen this before. And this is an image showing wild wheats or wild relatives of wheats, okay, in a setting, okay, probably someplace in West Asia. So how did wheat originate? All right, for one thing, hybridization and polyploidy, both of which we've talked about before, yeah? Hybridization is when you cross plants that have different, you know, genomes, that have kind of different genetic makeup. Polyploidy is when you have more than 2 sets of chromosomes, because most organisms, well, a lot of organisms have 2 sets of chromosomes, right? Or diploid, like we humans, we're diploid, yeah? What happened? You actually got people, okay, this actually happened in nature as well as people did it too, deliberately maybe. You had one kind of wheat, diploid, you can see AA, that actually just stands for 2 sets of chromosomes crossing with a goat grass, okay, with a genome designated as BB, okay. Cross these 2 together, you got another kind of wheat, okay, which people call emmer wheats and durum wheats. Durum wheats are used to make pasta, okay. What happened then? And you would have expected A and B as being the genome of this one here, but what happened is that it doubled its chromosomes. So here you have AABB standing for something known as a tetraploid. Tetra means 4 in Greek, right? So generally you have 4 sets of chromosome in these different kinds of wheats, right? Very good for one thing. Another thing too is that this might have been a deliberate hybrid. They crossed again, another goat grass, okay, with this wheat here, and they ended up with AABBDD, or a hexaploid, okay, hexaploid, which means 6 sets of chromosomes. And this is actually what we use now for most of our bread wheats, okay, or some variety of this. I think they call it Triticum aestivum, okay? Anyway, so this is something that happened over thousands of years. Think about it. We humans as a species, we're really brilliant. You know, we really are. People actually did this, okay, and managed to bring something into the world that we use for food. Okay, this is one of our good features and also our downfall, is that we have the ability to change what's going on around us, okay? Now, modern types of wheats, okay, include the durum wheats and the bread wheats, okay, that we talked about a little bit. Here's a modern kind of fruiting head here, okay, of this kind of plant here. All right. So this Triticum aestivum, and this is a bread wheat, is mostly the type that people grow. About 90%, okay, of the wheat that's grown is Triticum aestivum, okay, and this is used in breads. Okay, look at that. Doesn't that look great? Bread, yeah. Also these pastries and also breakfast cereals. This is nice looking. So every time we have these things about food, I start to get hungry. All right, so another thing, so hard wheat, okay, from the bread wheats, has a higher content of a protein known as gluten that kind of make the bread sticky, you know, like when you're kneading bread and it's kind of sticky and doughy, yeah? So the hard wheat is used for bread making, okay? Secondly, we also have soft wheat, okay, that tends to have lower gluten content. And here we have a tart, you know, with a crust, probably made from soft wheat. This looks like a strawberry tart. And here we have donuts, wow, okay? Anyway, get your carbs, you know. So we also have spring wheat. Spring wheats tend to be planted in the late spring or early summer, then harvested in the fall. And I just have this illustration here just because it's showing the coloring of the leaves turning, yeah. And then we have also winter wheats. People tend to plant winter wheat in the fall, then it overwinters in the ground, and then it grows and is harvested in the spring or in the summer, okay. Then nutrition, okay, for one thing, very, very high in vitamins and minerals and stuff that we need, which is wheat, okay? So it's missing only vitamin A, which we see here, okay? Vitamin B12 and vitamin C, okay? And also iodine, but still very, very nutritious, okay? Also a heavy feeder too though. So if you have whole wheat, you got lots of nutrients in the bran and the germ. So the whole wheat is probably the best kind of wheat to eat. Another thing too is that a lot of the wheat that we use in the United States, you know, if you're baking a cake or you yourself are making, you know, some kind of a nice treat, you know, out of this, if you like to bake, bread or anything else, a lot of the flour that you're going to probably be using is refined. So usually people, when they use white flour, and I think they made it a law, in fact, in the United States, that white flour tends to be enriched, okay, by the manufacturers, and they tend to add mostly iron and B vitamins. So what do? They take away the nutrients when they kind of make the flour, mill it, and then they add back the nutrients when they're enriching it. Yeah. At the same time, too, breads and such made with white flour tends to not to have as much fiber in it as much as we would like. Okay, so always whole wheats are actually your best bet, and it really is true. Once you're actually used to eating whole wheats and whole grains, you know, you really like it. And even now, I think that I grew up eating white rice. You know, just a local person, so I'm eating white rice every day. But nowadays, even when I go to the cafeteria, I'll eat brown rice, and actually I prefer it now. You know, so your taste can change. You know, but I have to say that sometimes when I eat white rice now, which is not very often, that it's really, really good too, you know, because it's like a nice treat, okay? All right, so here, okay, just kind of showing that whole wheats, okay, whole wheats have a lot more protein than unenriched white flour or white unenriched flour, and even if it's enriched, you don't have a whole lot of protein, not at least compared to that. So generally, you can run your eyes over these numbers, and generally you can say that if you use whole wheat to bake with, or you buy whole wheat bread, or you even make pastries or get whole wheat pastries, that's probably better for you too. You know, and actually it gives you more tooth. It has more substance, you know, when you're eating it as well. Okay, very good. Next thing we're going to talk about, okay, is Native American maize, also known as corn. Okay, this plant is also known as Zea maize. That is a scientific name. I think it was named by Linnaeus. And here you can see that it's very beautiful. Yeah, when you have like the autumn season in temperate areas where they actually grow this. Yeah, and it's very beautiful. They use it as decoration in many of their holiday themes. You know, like if they're throwing a party, you have all this different colored corn, and people put squashes of all kind in there and pumpkins. Yeah. Anyway, so corn was a basis. It was actually the carbohydrate base for the diet of civilizations in the New World. And of course, that includes North America and South America. So this is the area of the world, and Central America, Mesoamerica, known as the New World. I can't assume that people know about that for sure. Another thing too is that you have this area from South Canada to South America is the place where you had all these New World civilizations, including the Incas, okay, in South America, including the Mayans, the Aztecs, and a whole bunch of other peoples that lived in those areas. Very advanced people. They had, you know, astrology. They had definitely a very complex, you know, mathematics, okay. Now this corn, what we call corn, also known as maize, they have staminate flowers and pistillate flowers, okay? So here you have the tassel we showed you a little earlier, called the male inflorescence. We have the female inflorescence, also known as the ear, with all these silks, yeah, the stigma and the style. Okay, what is this particular condition called, where you have staminate flowers and pistillate flowers in the same plant? Do you remember what it's called? I think I won't tell you about it. You have to kind of look it up. Okay, so think about it, all right? So what is this condition called, where you have male flowers and female flowers on the same plant? Okay, just think about that. Another thing about this Zea maize is that this plant is not really adapted to survive in nature by itself, okay, without human help. Why is that? Think about it too. Okay, take a look. This is a clue. Here's some corn that has been harvested, and here you have others. You have this husk. Right? Here you have the husk of this corn. It's really very beautiful corn, and this one here too. Okay, the husk actually won't dehisce and split or anything like that. So if the corn, you know, goes to seed, or you have the fruits, and then the ear, you know, matures and falls off the plant and ready for the next year, any seed that germinates, okay, in here, okay, will be competing so much from each other. They have to kind of fight their way out of the husk. Okay, and then they'll be competing with each other very much. So you're not going to have very much productivity, because this plant is such a so-called advanced plant. So much of its genome has been used and bred and manipulated by humans that it can't survive on its own anymore in the wild. It is truly a domesticated plant. Okay. So So different kinds of types of corn, okay? It depends on what kind of starch is present. You have hard starch and you have soft starch, okay? Remember, what are the two components of starch? Okay, you have amylose, okay, and you have amylopectin, okay? Those are the two main components in starch, all right? So generally, you have hard starch has a higher amount of amylase and a lower amount of amylopectin proportionately. And you have all these different kinds of corn types, okay? Popcorn, flint corn, flour corn, dent corn, sweet corn, okay, which is a big feature in Hawaii because we actually have here in Hawaii a man who is quite famous for his breedings in super sweet corn. Yeah, the sweet corn. I think it was super sweet number 10 something or super sweet number 9. I don't really remember, okay? You have waxy corn, you have pod corn as well. So here's all these different kind of corns, very, very varied, okay, for a truly domesticated plant, okay? All right, so you have generally corns tend to be a summer annual. They tend to grow in the warmer season. What they like is that they can actually be grown under diverse conditions depending on what kind of variety you have, depending on what kind of corn you're growing. Okay, so you can have it even in pretty cold regions as well as, you know, like we said, from southern Canada, it gets pretty cold over there, right? And northern United States all the way down to South America, and South America too. As you get to the southern end of it, it gets to be very cold too. Tierra del Fuego, right? Very cold. They tend to like maybe like moderate temperatures, lots of sunshine, because you can tell since this plant is so nutritious and has so much starch in it and etc., it's a heavy feeder. All of these different kind of main grains that we talk about, just, you know, the big three of the grains, they tend to be needing a lot of fertilizer, a lot of sunshine, okay? All right, so here, hybrid corn. So this is a photograph of super sweet, okay, some kind of a sweet corn. And here in Hawaii, you know, is a place where they've been doing hybridization of corn. And did you know that in Hawaii too, we're like just about the #1 place in the whole country where people are doing a lot of genetic engineering. Even at UHM, they actually have a Department of Agricultural Engineering. Okay, they have a lot of money to actually do, you know, different kinds of things, and it's kind of like a controversial subject right now. Yeah, all the GMOs that people are producing. So hybrid corn is actually the most widely grown crop in the United States. And hybrid, what is a hybrid corn? Is when you cross one kind of corn variety with another kind of corn variety. And that's pretty good. You get really, really good results from that. You actually get an increase in yield. So here you see this little row of these little baby corn plants, okay, with taller corn plants in the back, these small little baby corn plants, okay. Remember that, they're really small. Okay, so they will show desirable characteristics when you make hybrid corn, when you cross one variety with another one. This is something that you would, instead of just getting one ear or one female inflorescence in a stalk of a plant, you get 2 to 3 ears per stalk. You see these corn plants? These are the same baby corn plants that we just looked at, maybe about less than a month later, and it's actually larger than the corn that was behind it. So this is hybrid corn. This is something that we call what they call hybrid vigor, okay? So you have stronger stalks too, and you have the ears in a standard position, so you can actually run the machine through these rows of corn. You can harvest it mechanically instead of having to pay people to do it, you know. So some people might not agree with that, but it actually will make things a little bit more efficient. I myself, I'm not so sure that that's always so good, because maybe energetically it might actually cost people more. It's hard to figure out these kinds of things, which is actually better or not. So when you make hybrid corn, you will increase production. Okay, so this 2 to 3 years per stalk for one thing, also stronger stalks for another one. Okay, and two characteristics you can get from hybrid corn. Okay, so it's something called hybrid vigor. That means sometimes you cross one plant with another plant that differ in one particular characteristic or more. You cross them together, and their offspring plant might be bigger, stronger, more productive. And that's also known as heterosis. Okay, hybrid vigor. Okay. Now, this disadvantage of this hybrid corn is that the farmers that do grow corn will have to buy seed corn every year. That was another avenue of a lot of controversy, okay, years and years ago. Before, you know, what people had done, I think, I won't mention what company it was, but a particular company that supplied a lot of the farmers, small farmers, you know, around the United States with seed corn, what they call seed corn, to grow a new crop of corn. They actually engineered a kind of corn that would abort. Okay, when the fruits were ready, the seed would actually abort. So when you had the corn ear, okay, the actual individual fruits, after a certain amount of time, they would die. So you couldn't actually get seed corn from the crop you grew the previous year. Okay, so that was kind of like a big controversy that this company had actually had engineered this particular kind of corn to self-destruct. And of course, it was probably a business move to try to make sure that they could sell seed corn to the farmers every single year instead of the farmers being able to get their own seed corn. Okay, that seemed like not quite a very ethical thing to do, even though when you think about it, when you go into business, you're going to business to make money. And when you go into business, that's the whole idea, to stay solvent and to make a profit. That's the two things you want to do when you have a business. And sometimes businesses can be quite ruthless, Not saying the individuals in the business are bad, but just that is the goal of the business. Those are the goals of the business, and that's just how it is, Very bad though, but I'm glad there was kind of like an outcry about that. So here you have some corn. Looks like it's in with another bunch of grains here, probably wheat. Okay, so we're going to get into the ancestry of corn. Okay, let's see. So most people, not really sure, but remember George Beadle that we talked about before? Yeah, I believe he won a Nobel Prize. He proposed that the ancestor of corn was teosinte. And over on the right-hand side, you see an image of wild teosinte. Okay. So one piece of evidence is that you can actually hybridize maize with teosinte. That's one piece of evidence that points to the fact that they're at least related to each other. Another thing shows is that generally they have the same number of chromosomes. They have a diploid number of 20. Yeah, like we humans, we have a diploid number of 2n equals 46. Well, this particular grain has a 2n number of 20. Okay. Now the thing is, for corn to have developed perhaps from teosinte, all right, early people had to have two major mutations to happen. Okay, for one thing, you had to have something called a non-shattering spike. Most grasses, as they mature after pollination and fertilization, the spike or the inflorescence, as the fruits are ready to go, it'll shatter, okay, when you touch them, all right? So that allows a dispersal of the fruit and the seed, okay? That's one thing. You have to have a non-shattering spike. Another thing is generally you have to have a reduced fruit case, either a reduced fruit case or a soft one. When you're eating corn on the cob, and generally you can eat the little grains, and then you're eating the corn, and then there's a little cup in there. You have a little part of the grain that's adhering to the cup. Well, that is actually the fruit case. So I guess when you kind of look at an image of teosinte, okay, you can see that it looks very much different from corn. Okay, and this one here, this teosinte actually does have, some of them have a fruit case that pretty much covers the grain, okay, or the fruit. So they had to find, somehow two major mutations had to have happened for corn to have developed from teosinte, or maybe even a common ancestor, okay? Now the thing is, another piece of evidence is that they did breeding experiments. They actually did breeding experiments, and between corn or maize and teosinte, and they came up with plants that had these ears or female inflorescences very similar to those from about 7,000 years ago. And this is actually some corn cobs, right? What's left of the female ear from earlier dig to earlier. So maybe about 7,000 years ago, you'd have ears about this size, very similar, okay, to the ones that they came up with when they were doing the breeding. Okay, so that's some evidence for that. Okay, they've also done molecular research, probably trying to compare the genome of teosinte to corn, and they find out that it supports a hypothesis. Okay, now corn, very valuable, but most of it is used for livestock feed. Okay, corn is also a plant that people have done a lot of molecular genetics and molecular, fiddling around with its genome with good, intentions and such. Okay, so maybe remember we talked about this earlier. A good percentage of the corn that is produced in the United States are genetically modified organisms. Okay, we'll have to see in terms of time. We have to wait and see what some of the effects are going to be from that. Okay, so there you had sheep, here you have cattle, okay, grazing in their nice little pastures. Another thing about corn is that whether it's for livestock or whether it's for us, it's a very good source of the three, macronutrients that we need, the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins. Okay, some of the products includes cornstarch, of course, something that a lot of people use, cornmeal. You can use that for making cornbread and other things like that, which is really good. That's probably a favorite food of mine. Also, corn flour is also used. Also, oil, syrup, okay, from corn. So here's another illustration from text. You have livestock feed. You have some of, the corn harvest being used for seed corn. You have different sort of applications that people can use for in terms of industrial work and such. Some, of course, we have surplus because corn is a subsidized crop, I think, in the United States. Some we export. Okay, we have food products, alcoholic beverages, also gasohol, okay, ethanol, okay, for fuel. And we have two different kinds of alcoholic drink, that at least two. You have something called chicha, okay, I guess it's South America, people make that, and bourbon. Bourbon is a kind of whiskey, usually prepared from corn mash, okay. I guess if you're really liking your whiskeys, I think people really get into it. It's almost like a cult, getting into Scotch drinking or bourbon drinking and like that. And I guess just like anything else, you develop a really good palate for, some esoteric sort of liquors and stuff. Now, the third big group that we're going to talk about is Oryza sativa, also known as rice. And this is literally a food plant, okay, that supplies billions of people with the major, calories every day. Okay, so this particular grain, rice, feeds more people on Earth than any other of the grains. Okay, more than 2 billion people. That makes sense when you think about China for one place, also India for another place. Two of the most populous places in the world, and lots of people in China and India eat a lot of rice. Okay, this is also a crop that is grown only for human consumption. Generally, people don't usually feed it so much, to the livestock or any other animal. Maybe I know that I used to know a lady who used to make her dog food, so she used to put rice in there. But generally, rice is generally grown for humans only. Okay, unless people kind of do something else. Another thing about it also is that this plant was also cultivated for 11,500 years, especially in China and in India. Okay, it's one of the oldest domesticated crops. This is kind of awesome, So here's a nice map showing China. You can see a little bit of the Indian subcontinent as well. And you can see here too, this is like a political map, and you can see generally China, India. You have some of the countries between them, including Tibet and Nepal, Bhutan, okay, some people call it Shangri-La, okay, Bangladesh, okay, not really adjacent to China, but still, lots of smaller countries in there too, and Pakistan over on this side. Another area in the world where there's a lot of unrest and not happy people, politically. Okay, so these rice plants tend to grow mostly in lowland tropics. They like to have warmer climates, and they like a lot of water. Flooding and growing them in rice paddies is an ancient way to do this. Beautiful photograph of rice paddies. I think that is in China someplace. Okay, so another thing is brown rice. Brown rice is very good for you. It is the whole grain that has been dehulled. Okay, the hull has actually been taken off of it, right? And very much brown rice is much more full of B vitamins and others such as white rice. Remember that we talked about beriberi? Beriberi is a B vitamin deficiency that can result when people rely mostly on white rice for the calories, because the grain has lost a lot of its B vitamins, when it's actually polished and such. Okay. Still though, even now in Asia, people tend to prefer white rice. Okay, that's sort of like a statusy thing, because white rice is more processed, it's more expensive than brown rice. So I think even nowadays, many people in Asia prefer white rice, even though brown rice is more nutritious. Okay, so there are lots and lots of varieties of rice. Two main types include the indica subspecies and the japonica subspecies. For one thing, the drier one, like when you're eating rice and it's flakier, more drier, which is how people tend to like it more in the United States and in a lot of the Western countries. They tend to like it when it has more of that amylose, so it tends to be drier. Tackier rice that tends to be more sticky is a japonica rice, yeah? And so this one here has less amylose, very much allied, sort of like with the different kinds of wheats. More amylose or less amylose, depending on what purpose you want to use it for. Now in 2002, there was a company that has announced that they did sequence the genome of rice. Now, why did they do rice? Why didn't they do corn, or why didn't they do wheat? For one thing, rice has 430 million nucleotides making up its genome, okay? And the corn genome is much larger than that. It's 5 times larger, and the wheat genome is 40 times larger than the genome of rice. So investigators and researchers are so very, very excited about this, about the possibilities in terms of changing rice, doing genetic engineering, making something better. Remember that we talked about before in earlier lectures about golden rice, how people who are doing genetic modification, they actually changed the genome of the rice so that it would produce beta carotene. And they did it with good ideas behind it. They wanted to do that so people in places where they ate a lot of white rice would be able to get beta carotene and not get beriberi, okay? Alrighty, here. Now, we're also going to talk about some other grains as well, okay? Yikes. Alrighty. So for one thing, okay, we have a kind of grain known as rye, okay, also known as Sacchalis cereale. Now, triticale, okay, triticale, I don't know if you say it triticale or triticale, but triticale is actually a hybrid between wheat and rye, okay, because they are relatively closely related to each other, so you can produce a hybrid that way. Okay, so here's a nice image of rye, right? And here you have wheat berries, or the fruits of wheat. Here you have the fruits of rye, and here you have triticale, okay, in the center. Okay, so you can form a hybrid between these two groups. Remember that everything we're talking about today are actually grains from the grass family. Yeah, so some of them are closely enough related to each other. Okay, so you can actually hybridize some of them. Okay. Another kind of grain that has been important to humans, anybody who's ever eaten an oat cake, from some coffee shops, very delicious, okay, very famous. And in fact, I think a local newspaper has actually had articles and publications of recipes that approximate the oat cakes of a particular coffee shop that's kind of famous, right? Don't you wish you bought stock in that a long time ago? Anyway, so you have oats, okay, Avena sativa. Sativa usually just means a common type of a plant, Anyway, so oats, okay, very good. I think oats are a grain that is especially grown and savored in Scotland, I think. And I think in Scotland, it's cold there, And I also think that generally, too, in Scotland, pretty much you're pretty famous for oats and different kinds of breakfast components, kind of bringing that together. So oats, very nutritious. It's very, very good for you, rolled oats. Anybody who has ever eaten oatmeal, it's a wonderful thing on a cold morning, hot cereal. That's really great. And you also have barley as well, Hordeum vulgare. Vulgare doesn't mean really vulgar. Actually, vulgar comes from vulgare because vulgare means common, just like sativa does, okay? Anyway, here's a picture of barley. You can have barley water. People drink barley water, and I think that they have, what is it? Other things. You actually germinate barley sometimes, and I guess people consume that too, or is that wheat? Anyway, so barley, another kind of grain. I think they use this also for brewing, when people are brewing beer, barley, and hops, Another kind of grain is called sorghum. This is a plant that is very much important in Africa in terms of a carbohydrate source and other vitamin sources as well. Here's sorghum bicolor. Okay. Also, we have the millets. Millets is actually a good kind of grain. Remember that we talked about it a little bit earlier that wheat has gluten in it, and some of these other different kinds of grains also has gluten in it also. But there are people that have like an allergy to gluten. They actually are allergic to this protein. So some people consider that when you eat wheat, some people are allergic to wheat. It's kind of surprising and a little disheartening for people who do have these food allergies. So one of the recommendations they say is to actually go to millet. Try to eat millet. And I know for a while I was cooking millet, and serving it, and then I kind of mentioned to one of my colleagues that I was cooking millet, and the person kind of looked and said, "Oh, they use that for bird food, but you can eat it. Millet is very good, and it's also very low in gluten. So if you have food allergies and you're allergic to gluten, it's very hard, in our culture to find food that you can eat. If you can't eat wheat and you can't eat rice and you can't eat corn, it's very hard to find a good starch source to do it. Millet is pretty good. I've tasted it, and I think, like any other food, if you've been growing up eating it, that it's really good. And it is pretty good. I think most people might want to add a little bit, maybe butter or sugar or something to make it taste a little bit different, but still, I think it can be a good solution for people who unfortunately have wheat allergies and corn allergies and rice allergies. That makes it very hard if you have food allergies to give yourself, enough nutrition, Now the next subject we're going to talk about, okay, has to do with other kinds of grasses, okay? These include forage for livestock. Forage is just, you know, just like we talked about humans foraging. This is when usually an animal is led into a pasture or into a field and just allowed to eat whatever's there, happens to be there. Yeah. So in many parts of the continental United States and in Europe and in Asia, all over the world now, a lot of forests have actually been cut down or actually browsed to the point, you know, by different kind of ruminants to actually end up where you don't have hardly any trees anymore. You just have grasses that grow, which of course the animals will eat. Yeah, because remember, cows have a bacterium in their gut that allows them to digest cellulose. Remember that we humans don't have that. Anyway, so grasses can be used for forage as well. Okay, and of course the forage grasses tend to be perennials, herbaceous perennials, you know, kind of non-woody plants that tend to live more than 2 years. All right. Now this forage grows mostly grown mostly for the leaf and stem, because of course that's the part that the cattle and the sheep and various other kind of grazing animals would eat. So you can, they can eat it in different ways. For one thing, they can eat it from the field, so that's fresh. Another thing is that people can actually harvest it and make, you know, the dried grasses, which is called hay as well. So if, you know, if you have a rabbit or you have any other, you know, small rodent kind of animal, you know, sometimes the food manufacturers will make pellets, yeah, and you also have to feed these animals hay as well. This provides roughage in their diet, and in fact, if you have these animals that are, you know, true vegetarians or true herbivores, generally you do have to give them enough roughage and pellets. And in fact, they can get all their nutrients too from the pellets that you can buy for them. Okay. So you can actually feed these different kinds of livestock animals, okay, fresh grasses, okay, or you could also have dried grasses in the form of hay, or you have another kind of form known as silage. Okay, silage is generally hay or other kind of grasses that have been fermented for a while. So here you have some hay that has been baled and packaged so that when they put it in the silo, here's a silo, you'll actually have some parts decomposed. Okay, that probably cattle and such might even like that as a change, you know. All right. Now the last kind of grasses that we're going to be talking about include the turf grasses. Right. So here we have an image of like not a field, maybe, you know, a lawn where somebody has done the mowing back one way and back in another. So when you see, you know, if you're watching golf on television, my parents watch golf on television. So when you actually see those beautiful greens that they have at Palm Springs and all the other places where they have those golf tournaments and such, they actually have mowers. They'll ride it one way and they'll ride it another to make it look so nice this way. Because when you do cut grass, the direction that you cut it, it has like a nap to it. You know, like if you're doing sewing and you have velvet or other kinds of fabrics that do have a nap to it. If you cut it or in one direction, it looks kind of silvery. In the other direction, it looks really like it's really sucking up a lot of the light. Well, I guess turf is also done that too when you mow it. So turf grasses include grasses that you walk on, grasses that make up lawns, grasses or turf that they use for golf courses as well. Kind of important, economically important, okay? So these turf grasses, all right? They include Bermuda grass, they include centipede grass. A lot of these are the ones that people don't like. But turf grasses, so you see here in a lawn. Now turf, okay, turf is very kind of interesting. Okay, so here you have a lawn at somebody's house, also mowed. You can see that they mowed it sort of like in a checkerboard pattern, back and forth. Now turf is very good if you want to have a little lawn, you know, for your kids to play in, or, you know, for having your friends over, you can play like touch football or something if you have a big enough yard. But generally with turf, you have the plants crowded really close together. So one of the things we saw a little earlier that I didn't really remark was that the crop plants, they're spaced pretty far apart. That's to give each of these crop plants enough room so they can actually put out their flowers, put out their fruits, and then be harvested in an efficient way. So generally with these different kinds of crop plants, you tend to move them, you know, certain spacing, like 12 inches apart, 18 inches apart, or something like that. Probably there's people who done studies about that to find out the optimal distances, okay, between these different kinds of plants when you're growing cereal grains, especially too. Okay, but turf grasses are all kind of crowded, real crunched together, because what do people want when they're planting a lawn? They want a lush lawn almost like a carpet. Yeah, that's what they want. That's what they want. They want a nice grass so their kids can play in it, or their dog can run around on it, or something like that. Okay, sort of like the dream of the suburban America. So here's a little image kind of showing different kinds of weather conditions, climate conditions for different kind of grasses that people might recommend. So this is something, so if you're wondering what kind of grasses to plant, you can actually look it up on the internet, or even, you know, go into different kinds of turf grass companies and find out what kind of grasses that they recommend. I know here locally, I think people like zoysia, that's one type, zoysia, that's one people like to use in golf courses and such. Okay, so the plants are crowded together on these lawns, all right? And you can see in all these different kind of zones, has to do with how cold it gets, how warm it gets, how much rain it gets, and etc. Okay? Because generally, if you're going to be growing grasses, you probably don't want to be out there weeding, you know, every day, or having to fertilize every week or something. Anyway, so that actually points to a little bit of a drawback to grasses, is that you have lots of competition between these individual plants all crowded together, making up a lawn. Okay, because of that, the thing you have to actually give the plants a lot of nutrients. Okay, so here, this image on the right is showing a manure spreader. So this person here, this farmer or turf grass grower, is actually spreading organic fertilizer, manure, right, which comes from usually herbivore droppings, cow manure, chicken manure, you know, horse manure. Very good organic source, okay, of nutrients. Another thing too is that oftentimes when you have turf, you have to irrigate. You have to have sprinklers put in, and or you have to go out water your lawn, especially during the summertime. And what is it? When we're having a water shortage, yeah, that may not be so good, okay? So some of the a little bit of a controversy. So here you have people who are into plants, different sectors of what people might call the green industry. They sort of are not at, you know, loggerheads necessarily, but there's one group, you know, turf people, people who want to do golf courses, and also, you know, it's important, right? It's part of economy and things like that. But still, grasses are very heavy feeders. You pretty much have to fertilize it fairly often compared to others kind of plants. You have to irrigate it as well. Another thing about it is oftentimes you have to apply pesticides. You have all those little larvae in the soil eating up the roots and all this kind of stuff. So you have to give it water, you have to give it fertilizer. Many people will use chemical fertilizer like the blue type and like that. Don't want to name them, you know, different things like that. So it's actually not very good if you have a xeriscape situation. Okay, so in one kind of case, you might have people who are horticulturalists thinking, pushing for the xeriscape. Xeros means dry, so what you want to do is put less thirsty plants in. So if you were to go to the Halawa gardens, you know, and go over there, they actually have literature there that will tell you about how to grow less thirsty plants. And one of the things they say is to limit the area planted in turf, okay, which are grass. Lawn grasses, because you need to fertilize it, you need to water it and irrigate it, especially in the summertime. Okay, you need to give it pesticides so often, or you're going to have a lawn that doesn't look so nice. So every homeowner, you know, anybody who owns a single-family residence, probably has this fantasy, this dream of this carpet, this green carpet in their backyard. They can imagine their dog running around on it, or their kids running around and playing a swing set, all this kind of stuff, you know. And I believe in that. I believe that people do have a right to have the dream of, you know, having a nice lawn. But still, turf is a heavy feeder, so people have to kind of weigh the two things together. The thing too is that if, you know, you have these different places that you do need to fertilize fairly often, including golf courses, they have like a rotation. Maybe they fertilize twice a week or once a week. They also rotate the pesticides which they're using when. So what you can do is that you have all this stuff going into here. It's actually percolating down through all the layers of lava rock, getting into the freshwater lands in there. Also, a lot of these things are being washed out into the ocean, causing algal blooms, like some of the Dictyosferia, the different kind of algae that people consider to be real major pests, you know, crowding out other algae that they think are more desirable. So fertilizer, you can't do anything in the world without it affecting something else, okay? So everything is all together. We're all part of the same picture, you know? Anyway, that's kind of an interesting thing, okay? Alrighty, too. So you need to mow too, and as you're mowing, you're making, you know, pollution. You're also using up gasoline and oil. Okay. So one thing that people can kind of try to recommend okay, that they want you to use something called mulching mowers. These are mowers, you know, I guess most homeowners wouldn't be using a huge mower like this, but mulching mowers will actually cut up the grass pieces small enough that you can leave it on the lawn, and I guess what they call it is thatch. Because in the olden days, they wanted you to get all the grass clippings, bag them, send them to the landfill, which isn't necessarily the best thing, actually. Because if you do, you know, it actually costs money to transport it over to the landfill, and then you have to actually put it in there. And in fact, if you have a whole truck full of grass clippings, they'll actually charge you if you take it to the dump, okay, so for you to dump a truckload of stuff there. So a good solution might be what you call composting. What is composting? Grass clippings, stuff from your kitchen, eggshells, you know, things like that. Okay, composting. You make this really, really nice, what they call humus. Okay, so this, and when you actually put banana peels and you put, you know, your various kinds of vegetable peelings and different things that you can't use, you make a compost heap. You might add a little bit of soil to it. You know, what happens? The bacteria that are in it are going to raise the temperature really high. They're actually breaking down all that organic material to make this really beautiful, nice black compost, which is very, very nutritious for your garden. So composting is a good thing, you know. Right? So this is something that'd be very good in order to get your waste and actually use it to make something that will really help your lawn. So this is something too that people might call amendment. You know, this is like very rich. It's almost like black gold, you know, for your lawn, for your other plants, and etc. Okay? Alrighty, so here we go. Now we're going to do the summary for today's lecture as well. Okay, for one thing, we talked about the family, the grass family, or also known as the family Poaceae, and also some of the characteristics about them, okay, including the vegetative characteristics, the characteristics of the root, the stem, and the leaf. We also talked about floral characteristics of this group of organisms as well, talked about how they're wind pollinated, and this actually will account for how they actually do reproduction, okay. We also talked about the three major grains, okay, including wheat, okay, including rice, and including corn, okay, feeding a good deal of the world, providing the people of the world and animals of the world too, some of them, some domesticated animals, okay, with a lot of their energy requirement needs, okay, major grains, wheat, corn, and rice, okay. We also talked about a few other grains, including sorghum, including millet, including rye, including oats, including barley. I think I might have covered all the bases there, okay. And then we talked about forage grasses, which are eaten by livestock. And of course, most people in the United States and elsewhere like to eat a little bit of meat. Okay, so we have these forage grasses, all right, for that too. Very important. Okay, so grasses are very important to us. Then lastly, okay, we talked about a little bit of landscape grasses such as turf. All right, anyway, so that's all that we were going to do today. And hopefully you had a little bit of fun going through this very important family that are very important economically and also gustatorially to us as well. Okay, so we'll see you next time and wish you a nice the rest of the day. Okay, aloha, see you later.